Hello, my name is Stephen, Dr. Stephen Hairfield. If you're watching this video, then know that I am deeply honored and privileged to have you view it. The subject I'm going to offer to you today is one of great fondness of mine. Um, it's something that I've spent about 35 years of my life studying. Um, just kind of as a brief synopsis of me, I've spent many years in India studying the Tibetan path of Mahayana Buddhism. And upon my return to the United States, I decided to get a master's degree in religion and theology. And the subject I'm going to talk with you about today is not really about the Bible itself. It's about the book that I've written, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible. And the reason I've decided to do this is for something that I received earlier this week that I was unaware of, and that's the fact that the American Institute of Holistic Theology utilizes that book, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible, in their doctoral program. And it's required reading, required study, and they even have to do a dissertation on it to receive their degree. So to me, that's an incredible privilege and an honor. And because of that, I decided to share some of the information that's in that book in hopes that more and more people will read it to realize the truth. In the book, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible, it's based on a great deal of fact and truth. And that's the only thing that I offer in it. You could even say it's an Eastern look at the biblical text. The biblical text, in truth, once you strip out the dogma and the fear factor, is written much like the Vedas themselves, which is one of the oldest known spiritualized texts in our world. So where I'm going to begin with you today is I'm going to give you a synopsis of the history of the church, how it got the power that it did. And keep in mind, I'm not against the Bible whatsoever. In fact, I honestly feel it's one of the greatest books ever written on the idea of achieving your own divine Christ consciousness, which Christ and in theory, the Creator, both told us that we could have. But there's a journey involved in that. And I share that journey in my book, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible. So to begin, I'm going to give you a synopsis or an idea of how the church, the original church, Catholic Church, because all religions have their basis in their idea, which is not necessarily the truth, and that is the truth. So some things I'd like for you to know and understand in the history of the Bible is the fact that the whole thing was created out of some documents that were picked and chosen. And the whole basis was all about the Catholic Church gaining power over the minds, the souls, and the hearts of human beings. And to me, that's not fair to us individuals who are truly seeking the idea of what we already are. That being said, when the Catholic Church put this book together, it, like I said, it picked and chose the books that it wanted. And the way it gained its power is through fear. You got to remember, when the Bible itself was put together, it was during a period of what we refer to as the Dark Ages. Very superstitious period of time. So what they did is they usurped one superstition or all the superstitions for another. They created an illusion to a great extent. But when we strip out the dogma, we find the truth. The truth itself is revealed. See, to me, there's nothing to be afraid of in the idea of the Creator. It created us. Why would it do anything but love us? It doesn't judge us. It doesn't condemn us. But the church wants you to think that it does, so that if you go to that church, you'll have salvation and be saved. Yet, ironically, Christ himself says no human can forgive another. Only the Creator has the ability and the opportunity to do that. And the interesting thing is, you are your own Creator. So you are the only one that can offer you forgiveness. So let's take a look at the idea of the history of that book. First off, to realize the whole truth about it, you not only have to study the biblical text and the religious idea, but you also, my suggestion would be, is study the history of Rome, because there was a lot of things, of course, keeping in mind that Rome was the country in charge, if you will, at the time of the creation of the biblical text. In 1996, and I don't think you know this, but Pope John Paul himself gave a speech, and in that speech, He asked for forgiveness of the church for the over 10 million deaths at the hands of the Catholic Church. Think about that. That is more people killed at the hands of a religious organization than Adolf Hitler himself. In fact, if you really looked at it and you combined all the wars together, the Catholic Church is single-handedly most responsible for the most deaths by any single entity. Why? Because those people did not want to go along with the idea of power and control. In fact, according to Pope John Paul at the time in 1996, most of those people happened to have been women, not men. And I find that extremely intriguing. The second thing I'd like to offer you is this. The Catholic Church is also responsible for more devices of torture than all of the nations in the history of the world combined. One single, theoretically, supposedly religious organization taking the lives of well over 10 million people during the period of the Inquisition, but it's also responsible for the development of so many devices of torture to get people to repent at the risk of their own death. You also have to know that in the early years of the Catholic Church, the way it gained power was to be the tax-gathering arm of all the small kingdoms and fiefdoms throughout its total territory. So not only were they responsible for collecting the taxes and the wealth for that king or that principality, but they also had the ability to take your land from you, take your life from you, and certainly at the time they were threatening to even take your soul from you. So for a period of 1,500 years, they developed this power and control through that type of methodology. Look, you don't have to believe me on those points. Do the research yourself because the documentation is out there. And if anything, that should really irritate you because, in all sincerity, what that single entity has done is led us away from the truth of our own self. And in my book, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible, that truth is revealed. And as I said initially, this book does not have any disparaging remarks against the idea of the Creator, the Christ, and or the book itself, the Bible. It's totally against what the original churches did. And even if you think about it, as all the different ships sailed around the world in the 14, 15, 16, 1700s, they always had a Catholic priest on board. And it was always a Jesuit priest. Why? What they were doing was looking for the wealth of any nation that the explorers were traveling to. And then they reported that back to the Catholic Church. Not only that, they took as much of that wealth as they could and put it in their own coffers. So they were about material reality and money. Now, all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about the book itself. The four Gospels, what are those about? And why did they choose those? Because you see, to me, there's no accident in anything in the world. And not even in the way that they put this book together, because the truth is still revealed in those pages. The book of Matthew is about your physical, material experience in this world and what's actually going to happen to you. The book of Mark, by the way, used to be one of the largest of the four Gospels, but thanks to Pope Gregory the Great, around 900 AD, he removed most of it when he claimed that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. But why did he do that in the first place? And that's simple, because she was the greatest competition. Why? Because she was teaching the path of the Gnostics. And in fact, when you read the Bible and you read any of the portrayals of the Christ, they were portraying the Gnostic side of the Christ, not necessarily the human side, a state which we can all achieve if you know how to do it. So Matthew is about the physical idea of life. Mark is about the mental idea of life, how your mind's going to operate, things you're going to think, things that you're going to do. Luke is about your emotional experience in this world. And the last, and maybe the most significant of the four Gospels, is the book of John, which is about achieving your spiritual nature. That being said, when you read any of those four Gospels and you keep those four ideas in mind, they'll tend to make a little more sense. And so you got to ask yourself a question: how did I arrive at that idea? By the study of virtually almost every single ancient text I could get my fingers on, such as the Nag Hammadi, also known as the Gnostic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Vedas, the Buddhist Sutras, because they all say the same thing that the Bible does. But those don't have any of the dogmatic approach which the Catholic Church applied. And the only reason they did that was to create the fear factor, to give them the power over you. And what have most of us done throughout the centuries? We've given them that power. It's a power that was never intended in the design of creation. And at some point, maybe I'll cover the book of Genesis in another video, but certainly not this one. So when you read those four Gospels, look at it from that perspective. Because you see, it talks about how, in the book of Matthew, how we have to overcome not only our physical self, but in the book of Mark, learning to focus our mental self and mental being. And in the book of Luke, he actually talks about freeing your emotions to live through your heart. And then the book of John, of course, the last of the four, is the idea behind it, what you will become by so doing it. And I've always found it interesting because in the biblical text, there are certain numbers that seem to come up a lot. There's an example. Really, in the Sermon on the Mount, there were 7 specific points that he offered. It's an interesting number. And in truth, there were only actually 7 parables that he ever actually stated. And then when you look into the book of Revelation, you see that number quite a bit. The 7 angels, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, the plagues, the 7 horses, all of that different stuff. What does that mean? It's a description of awakening. In fact, that's really what the book of Revelation is actually about. It has nothing to do with the end of the world. Not at all. That's one of those fear factors that the Catholic Church had to use. In fact, the idea of the devil, or the word Satan, is actually a Vedic term defined and described as the ego. The ego is the tempter. There's no red guy running under the ground with a pitchfork. That's all baloney. You've got to ask yourself a question. Why in the world, so to speak, would the idea of the Creator create an arch enemy that he himself was not sure it could beat? That would be ludicrous. It's like God and the devil are playing a ping pong game, and the human is the ball that they're batting back and forth. That's all a trumped up illusion. It's not true. There is no Satan except within each of us as an individual, depending on how ego based you are. And when you read the text of the book of Mark, strip the dogma out, you find that that's one of the largest things that we as an individual must train and tame so it works for us, not get rid of it. It's part of it. It's the creative power. It is the power of the human being. And then when you look at the story, allegorically speaking, in fact, theology will agree with me in one point and one point only. The entire biblical text is based on allegory, metaphor. There's nothing factual about it. Ancients used metaphors when they wrote, not literal linguistics like we use today. So don't take that book, the Bible, literally. Take it metaphorically and you'll understand it, because it's a simple read once you do that. In the story of the Christ out in the wilderness for 40 days, the wilderness happens to have been the wilderness of mind, so to speak, using metaphysical terminology. So Christ spent 40 days in his mind taking on his own Satan so that he could graduate and wield the power that he knew that not only he had, that we all have. After all, wasn't it Christ himself said that even the least among you may do these things, and greater things may you do? Well, I'd rather believe that and what the Creator said in the book of Genesis when he said, now you are just like me. Well, I would rather believe those two than anything the Catholic Church ever throws out. And by the way, I love to share it with people. I am a recovering Catholic. I was raised in that religion. And my dad wanted me to become a priest. And when I became a Zen priest, he actually disowned me. But what the heck? He never told me what kind of priest. So I made my own choice. And I prefer the Eastern philosophy and things anywhere. And there's a lot of that intertwined in my book, A Metaphysical Interpretation of the Bible. Let's talk about Revelation for a moment. Because in Revelation, it's actually a description of how to open to yourself. Now let's look at that number I presented a little bit ago, 7. Isn't it interesting? The number 7, that's the number of times it shows up in the biblical text. That number, to myself, in my perception, relates to the idea of the 7 chakras, the 7 energy centers, which actually are what created the human. In the book of Revelation, it specifically states this idea, that let those with the ability open the 7 seals to the book of life. And then you go on to read that people warred against it, they fought against it, and no one could open it. And then it literally says, and then entered the Lamb. And of course, religion defines that as the Christ. That may be so, but to me, that's the Christ consciousness within you. The metaphor simply means if you're going to open those energy centers, then do it gently. When you do it gently and work with it, you clear those different energy centers and you achieve the consciousness that's your birthright, as is my birthright, as any human's birthright, that divine Christ consciousness within you. The rest of the different ideas that are presented in the book of Revelations, once more, it's not about the end of the world. It's about how you are going to change. Even if you look at the idea of the number of the beast, which Revelation talks about, number 666, and they talk about the Antichrist. Well, to me, the Catholic Church itself is the Antichrist, and the idea of Antichrist anyway is not a single individual. But the way Revelation actually puts it and states it is this. It literally says, let those with the ability to calculate the number of the beast is 666. Well, if you use simple numerology on that, that comes up to an 18, but in numerology, you always take it down to a single digit, 9. 9 means end of cycle or close of cycle. In other words, it's the close of the way that your life has been, which now means you're going into a new direction. And as the 7 trumpets sound, what they're actually saying, in fact, if you look at a trumpet and the idea of a chakra from the side, a chakra does resemble a trumpet when you look at it from the side. And what it's saying is when each of those chakras, from the first to the 7th, which is your crown, as they emit a new vibration, you are releasing old pent-up energies. And when they're releasing that new vibration, you're reading in those texts what your individual experience is going to be like. In other words, you're getting rid of illusion. You are removing yourself from illusion. Oh, another point that just occurred to me. People talk about Revelation being the revelation of St. John. Well, obviously, every single human on the planet, minister, priest included, forgot the first sentence of Revelation, because what the first sentence of Revelation says, and look it up yourself, and if I'm correct on that point, then everything I'm sharing with you is also correct and accurate. Because what it actually says is the revelation of Jesus Christ as given to John. So it's not John's revelation, it's Christ's revelation of what he experienced himself as he opened his own seals to his own personal book of life, and every single human can do that. In fact, I teach a meditation that I was taught in northern India years ago on how to do exactly that. So if you want to learn that, you can contact me and I'd be more than happy to share it with you. So my point with you is the reason that the American Institute of Holistic Theology, and I love that idea, holistic theology, because theology is so fragmented anyway. I'm so pleased that they use this book in their PhD program and make it required reading. I honestly would say, I think every human ought to read it. It'll give you a different take on you. But I've had so many people tell me that it just changed their life and their view of themselves totally. Because here's the point. You're perfect and there's nothing you can do about it. Christ does not, or excuse me, the Creator does not create imperfection, because if it did, it would make that thing somewhat of a joke. It only created in equality. That's the reason it told us in the book of Genesis, now you are just like me, a state of divine perfection. And that's interesting, because none of us choose to live it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're ever going to read a book on the idea of consciousness, then I would recommend mine. I'm not doing that because of an arrogant idea or anything other than, if you want to understand the truth of you, you can find it in the pages of that book sitting on my desk right over my left shoulder. I think it's my left. Yep. Just have to check that out. It's kind of like looking in a mirror. Anyway, there are more and more colleges and different organizations that are beginning to take a genuine look at this book. I'd like to ask you to do the same. If you'd like to find out more about me, you can visit my website, www.hairfield.com, and keep this book in mind. If you're on a journey, a search of truth, if you are seeking consciousness, then I would indeed recommend a metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. It's written from knowledge, it's written from experience, and most of all, it's written from my heart. And look, if you have any comments, I'm going to say keep them to yourself, because I already know that any Christian that looks at this video, I'm going to get a tirade of all kinds of things. But remember something. When you live in judgment, you'll never see the truth. In fact, there's an old Zen proverb that says this: if you have no opinions for or against anything, then you will see the truth. Judgment will blind you. So you may think of me whatever you choose. I'm interested in seeing people awaken to the divine truth of their self. There's an interesting word in India. It's called namaste. And here's what it means. When you are one with yourself, and I am one with myself, and when we meet and greet each other, then we are both one. So from my heart to you, namaste. And hopefully you'll enjoy the pages of this book. Thank you deeply. Shanti Satyam in Hindi means peaceful truth. Thank you.